In this roundup of a week, all the benefits of all the electric cars bought to date got wiped out by more people buying SUVs. A new report focuses on the health impacts of climate change for people born today, and the election campaign touches on the gender pay gap, and we see how badly good intentions can go wrong. My name's Mallen Baker. This is the Mallen Baker Show for Changemakers. When it comes to decarbonising the economy, ground transport is meant to be relatively easy. I mean, it's not that easy, but compared to air travel, it's meant to be relatively easy. In the UK Committee on Climate Change technical report, it calls for rapidly increasing the electric vehicle charging network and then banning petrol and diesel cars by 2035 or maybe 2030, so we will glide smoothly from then till now with an increasing percentage of electric vehicles and see the gradual decline of emissions from the sector as a result. However, those pesky human beings with their free will are getting in the way, according to the latest World Energy Outlook anyway. The problem is that while there is a growth in electric vehicles as expected, at the same time consumers are developing a preference for SUVs, which are bigger, heavier, less aerodynamic, and therefore with a higher fuel consumption, about 25% higher than a standard car. And because of all those factors, more difficult to electrify. The growth in the use of SUVs has actually offset the reductions that there would have been from the growth in electric vehicles to date. So why are people buying SUVs? Because now they have the performance and cachet that sporty cars used to have. Because you get to sit higher up and feel good on the road. Because the size and weight make people feel that they're in a safer vehicle. Because they've got increased capacity for a large family. Because they have extra clearance and distinctive styling and personality. In other words, they're cool and they're functional. Teslas are also cool, but a different kind of cool that appeals to a different customer. So this is the current reality. The question is, what do we make of it? The temptation, of course, for those who believe we're in the end of days, is to run around and flap their arms about. And sure enough, Greenpeace and other environmental groups have called for SUVs to be banned. Because when you have a population that, given free will, is clearly expressing a significant preference, then banning stuff is always the way to go. And you wonder why environmentalists struggle to win people over. I mean, literally, if your first instinct when you see people valuing something is to jump on it and shout, "No! Bad behaviour! Wrong thinking!" you're not going to win friends and influence people. The first thing is to recognise you're running a marathon, not a sprint. Every endeavour, every business, every sports champion, everything succeeds by overcoming multiple failures and setbacks on the way to success. If you're serious about changing the world, or even just succeeding in life, you should expect it, embrace it, raise yourself to the challenge. The idea that you'd ban SUVs means that you assume that car manufacturers are incapable of rising to the challenge. But of course, when they know that's what they have to do, it's exactly what they will do. The UK and numerous other countries are going to ban petrol and diesel vehicles at some point relatively soon in the future. Gives them enough time to develop and innovate to give people what they want in ways that meet the expectations of tomorrow. So you have Greenpeace saying ban these big body types and only produce smaller cars. As they were demanding that, Volkswagen were already flagging the release of its ID.4 electric crossover SUV, the same body style the campaigners were calling to be banned, but with zero emissions. And of course, Tesla already has an electric SUV of its own, albeit one that will leave your bank balance considerably poorer. And you know, what do we think is the most profitable campaign strategy if you want to help to decarbonise the economy? Putting pressure on the companies to move as fast as innovation and demand will allow in producing the SUV vehicles of the future? Or demanding governments ban highly popular vehicles before those alternatives are available or affordable, which they're not going to do, because the backlash against anyone who tried would be enormous. Or how about the even more absolute zero-sum option? Try to shame consumers into giving up SUVs in the same way that some people are trying to shame people into not flying. Of course, all that does is to heighten further the gulf between those arguing for environmental policies and the bulk of ordinary people who will just applaud even more vigorously as the Extinction Rebellion types get dragged off the roof of the underground trains. I think the UK and others have got the balance right by using the same principles that worked in the removal of ozone-destroying CFCs. In other words, announce an impending ban far enough in advance to permit the companies to innovate and create the alternatives in advance of the ban. By doing it this way, what you're banning is the internal combustion engine driven by fossil fuels. By doing it Greenpeace's way, you're banning SUVs that people want and value for multiple reasons. But if they can have those without the emissions, why would you even go there? Well, generally it happens because environmentalists have spent 30 years arguing that people should drive less and use public transport instead. Once you've been doing it for that long, it's very hard to adapt and decide that actually the advent of the electric car means you don't have to do that anymore. There is at least now a vision of how people can have what they want without the impact. But the truth is they don't want you to have what you want. They want you to want what they think you should want to want. I know some people think it's a sign that environmentalism is intendedly authoritarian. It has that danger, but I think for the most part it's just a failure of empathy. Wherever you go, people dismiss the motives of people different to them and paint them as being ill-intended, largely because they just don't understand what they really think and care about. And that's true whether you're talking political left and right, whether you're talking Brexit, or indeed on seeing urgency behind the action on climate change versus wanting that new sexy SUV that you just saw advertised. And while we're on the subject of cars and climate change, it's been announced this week that Formula One is going net zero carbon by 2030. This is a very big deal at exactly the same time as being a very small deal. A very small deal because, of course, the actual contribution to global emissions made by a few very highly powered cars going round and round in circles for a period of time is negligible, pretty much close to zero. But it is a hugely powerful symbol nonetheless. And it's a flag being waved right at the heart of a community that loves noise and fast cars, not usually those who are in your front rank of environmentalists. It does remind me of my own unique Formula One story. Many years ago, I did some corporate social responsibility work for the Honda F1 team. When I started, they'd already made the decision to go big on the environment. They'd wiped all the sponsorship branding off the car, which is millions of sponsorship given up, in order to put environmental messages on instead, to make a statement about some pretty non-trivial commitments they'd made. I wasn't involved in any of that predated me, but I nevertheless ended up on the panel of the press launch of the new car, sat alongside Jenson Button. Now, for full disclosure, I had no idea who Jenson Button was, but he was a friendly guy and we chatted briefly. Honda at that point was working with magical engineer Ross Brawn on the following year's car, and I knew that one was going to be great. But the current year's car, the Earth car, it was an absolute dog, and I don't mean a greyhound. In spite of Button's skill, it came last or close to last in every race. And as you can imagine, there were plenty of cynics who didn't fail to notice the unintended symbolism in that case. That was Honda's last year in F1. The 2008 financial crisis was happening, and they decided racing was a luxury they couldn't afford. Ross Brawn took over the team himself. No eco-branding. The new car took Jenson Button to the championship that year. Good for him and for them. Shame for the eco-branding exercise. I imagine that Button has completely struck that press conference and probably the whole dismal season that followed from his memory. Can't say I blame him. So anyway, back to the net zero carbon Formula One commitment. Does this mean we'll have electric cars on the track? No. There's already an all-electric Formula One alternative. It's not the aim to go there. It's worth noting, though, how much progress the sport has already made in raising standards for fuel emissions from its cars. From my brief experience with Honda, I came to realise just how incredible an operation there was underpinning all of these teams in terms of innovation. They had at that point something like 800 engineers, all working together to find multiple ways to improve the aerodynamic efficiency just that little bit fraction more, and to improve the engine just that touch extra. Formula One cars have often been where you see innovation taking place that can influence the wider world of motorised transport. So the support is committing to further engineering excellence in the future to bring the impacts down further, decarbonising the events themselves and a lot of the surrounding infrastructure. What's left then gets covered by carbon offsetting, but the focus is very much on reducing every single thing that can be reduced, not just a few token things and then offset the rest. Good for them. Now, there was a new report this week that focused on a number of news stories on the focus of children's health in an uncertain future. Specifically, the 2019 report of the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change. It covers a range of health impacts likely to face children born today if they experience a world of 4C warming, and was put together by doctors and researchers. Not that they're likely to face a world of 4C warming. It would have to be a worst case business as usual scenario to get us there by 2100, which is very much the end of the span for babies born today. But if we do go to 4C, the report talks about food shortages, the spread of disease by floodwater and mosquitoes in higher temperatures. It talks about the effects of air pollution on the lungs. Now, of course, climate change isn't caused by that sort of air pollution, but they do argue that warmer temperatures will trap more pollution in cities. The report provoked a number of press stories, including one in the climate edition of the UK tabloid The Daily Mirror, which told the story of various children and how they might be impacted under a 4C world. At least they chose children from parts of the world that are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So although it was catastrophised in a way that tabloid newspapers would, it wasn't as misleading as people like Extinction Rebellion's Rupert Read claiming UK children will maybe not grow up because of climate change. In the New Scientist write-up of the report, Rupert Read even got name-checked in exactly that context, under the title, "Health Impacts of Climate Change on Children Don't Need Exaggerating." They led with this paragraph: "A child born today faces far-reaching health impacts from living through a world of 4 degrees C warming than humans have ever experienced, according to a major assessment released today. But the research doesn't support claims by some climate activists that children may not grow up at all." It then covers the main aspects of the report and then comes back to Rupert Read recounting his apocalyptic talk to children and adding, "His remarks were condemned last month by climate scientists for straying beyond what science says." Read tells New Scientist his comments stem not just from the risk to children from individual issues such as infectious diseases and malnutrition, but potential societal collapse and the need to err on the side of precaution. Erring on the side of precaution being a get-out-of-jail-free formula for use when there's no science on your side whatsoever. As for the report itself, I have to admit I'm probably put off the Lancet brand for this sort of work. From the earlier Eat Lancet report, which proposed a single diet for the world population in the name of sustainability, which I thought was badly judged at best, and I was by no means alone in sharply criticising it. I have yet had a chance to look into the detail of this latest report, so I'll reserve judgment until I do, given how misleading the press write-ups can turn out to be. However, the BBC reported 4 recommendations from the report that I'm assuming they didn't make up, and these were: bold action to prevent the health impact of climate change in 4 main areas. 1. Stopping the use of coal. 2. Richer countries putting more money in to help poorer countries so they can help stop climate change too. 3. Increasing and improving ways to encourage people to walk and cycle. And 4. Putting more money into health systems so that the health services can cope with a number of patients. Is that really the list of main recommendations for this report? Seems incredibly weak if that's the case, almost like an afterthought. Not the level of specificity you'd hope for from a report compiled with medical expertise putting together with climate researchers. I'm going to assume there's more to it than that. I will confirm next time. On the subject of Rupert and Extinction Rebellion telling children they're going to die, I loved this video posted on YouTube by the very articulate teenager Lauren Jeffrey. Titled "Dear Climate Change Alarmists and Doomsayers, Congratulations," she gives an eloquent and well-argued kickback to people like Rupert, trying to put the fear of death into her generation. Here's some of what that looks like.
There's a video somewhere on YouTube, I might link it in the description. A video on YouTube of an Extinction Rebellion spokesperson talking in a school or to a bunch of young people. And he says, "The question isn't when you grow up anymore, it's if you grow up." And he says this to a room full of young people. This man is representing what I would say is the most important, or the most talked about at least, the most talked about activist group in recent years. And he's going around and he's telling children that they're not going to grow old, or that they're unlikely to grow old. But here's the thing. Adults like this, they go around and they tell young people that they won't grow old or that the end of the world is coming. And then they have the nerve to go, oh, why is every teenager so depressed these days? Why does everyone have anxiety? Oh, yeah, it must be those terrible, awful phones. No, it's not the phones. It's you. It's you people going around and scaring the living hell out of them with unscientific rubbish like that.
I put a link to her video in the video description below. Go and see the full thing and give us some encouragement. But if you're one of my regulars who likes to engage in, shall we say, robust debate, feel free to do so on my channel, but, leave the kids alone, eh? On a different topic, it's been Pay Gender Gap Week. This was celebrated by the Labour Party, who in the midst of the ongoing general election campaign promised to eliminate the gender pay gap by 2030 and to fine companies that don't match up. They're not the only party that is talking big on the topic though, including the outgoing government. All of them have equated the gender pay gap with evidence of sex discrimination in the workplace. Now, I've talked about this before in a previous video, but just a quick recap to point out how unbelievably stupid the stuff on the gender pay gap is in the UK. The gender pay gap is an incredibly crude figure that looks at all the men and women employed and compares what they earn. It's not a like-for-like comparison, just everyone's earnings. I always say that if you want to change the world for the better, one of the things you have to do is to see the world clearly. Otherwise, you might end up changing the wrong thing and having unintended consequences. This is a prime contender for exactly that. If you want to promote the position of women in the workplace, you don't want to support government action on removing the gender pay gap. Sounds counterintuitive, yes? Bear in mind, this is not about equal pay for equal work. In the UK, it's already illegal, and it has been for 50 years, to discriminate on the grounds of sex for equivalent jobs. That's not to say it never happens, but where it does happen, the law can deal with it if it's revealed. It's just not what we're talking about here. Put simply, if you have women who are part-time workers, that will make your gender pay gap worse. If you recruit more young female trainees, they'll have a lower rate of pay because they're trainees. That will make your gender pay gap worse. One of the things socially responsible companies are told they should do to support their female employees is to offer flexible working, especially when they first become mothers. Flexible working is a good thing, but it will make your gender pay gap worse. You shouldn't base policy on a measure that's so crude that by making it important, you create unintended perverse incentives. All the political parties are talking about some degree of action against companies that don't deal with their gender pay gap. So you're creating a disincentive to hire female graduates. You're creating a disincentive to offer flexible working. You're actually creating a disincentive to hiring women at all, although most won't follow the incentives that far. So great job, everybody. That's really going to help achieve equality. All right, just time quickly for a couple of things I like and maybe one or two things that I hate. In reference to my previous video in response to Tony Heller's video on why climate science is broken, it turned out that that story about scientist James Hansen conspiring with Senator Jim Worth to sabotage the air conditioning of the 1988 climate change testimony to Congress, which I took at face value and condemned as wholly inappropriate, was actually not true. One of my commenters, Palomath, directed my attention to a story that revealed that Worth made it up to dramatise the occasion. Supplementary evidence confirmed there was no mention in the records of excessive heat that day or broken air conditioning. Video footage doesn't show anyone visibly sweating or looking uncomfortable, which is a good thing. I criticised it because it would have been dumb if it had been true, but I can now narrow that criticism to Jim Worth just for making dumb stuff up. I also had to chuckle at Tony Heller's latest video where he showed this.
Here's something which Alex Epstein brought to my attention today. If you search for Tony Heller YouTube on Google, this is what comes up. 3 videos from YouTube faker Mallen Baker and none of my videos? Well, at least they have one of the podcasts I did with James Delingpole. It's interesting how Google searches for me go to everyone but me.
Apparently my videos are now the tool of the global Google YouTube conspiracy to keep him and all the others down. However, as I pointed out to Tony on a comment on his video, I use YouTube tags on my video as YouTube suggests that you should. It's part of the standard good SEO for videos. I've already noticed that Tony doesn't tag his videos nor his channel, which is probably why other content that he's tagged does better on search than his own. Once again, a conspiracy that just isn't quite a conspiracy. Hopefully he'll read those comments and start using tags, because it's not actually my intention to be so rude that my content appears ahead of his own content on searches for his name. Anyway, things that I hate. Well, I suppose there's Extinction Rebellion's bid to get a Christmas #1 song. I mean, really? Apart from the fact that the video that goes with this song is really quite misleading, suggesting police brutality as the main response to the protests, do we actually have to have climate change disaster as a Christmas #1 theme? I mean, do you think that wins people over to the cause? Can't you just for 1 week say, Merry Christmas everyone, have a lovely time with your family, without adding, because it might be your last? At least I can be fairly sure that in 40 years' time, when they're wheeling me into the Christmas party in the old people's home, they'll be playing Slade's Merry Christmas, not Extinction Rebellion song. Call me reckless, but I'm willing to put my money on that right here and right now. Anyway, that's all for this week. My name's Mallen Baker. This is The Mallen Baker Show.